So, good day. We are Group 8 and we are here to present about the Broadcast Code of the Philippines. So, first, what is the Broadcast Code of the Philippines pertain to? So, the Broadcast Code of the Philippines is a set of standards for performance and ethics which are followed by radio and television stations who are members of the KBP. The code is composed of three parts. In Part 1 includes the 33 articles of which the standards for programming are illustrated. Part 2 pertains to the implementing rules and regulations of the KBP, while Part 3 illustrates the penalties of a violation if a violation has been committed. So, for the general technical requirements in terms of the equipment should be constructed according into a good engineering practice in which it involves mechanical soundness, neatness of wiring, and accessibility for maintenance. Moreover, safety is the topmost priority alongside a good service for the broadcasting community. And in general terms, for the location of the broadcasting station, should consider the following, which is the size of the population to be served, conductivity of the soil that is adjacent to the site, conductivity of the path in between the site and the area. So for approval, it connotes to the following requirements. First, shall refer to the existing local and national regulations. Restrictions were based on the height and location of the mast in certain areas and obstruction, painting, and lighting in officially designated locations. Mast or towers less than 150 feet from the ground can be erected, and masts or towers more than 150 may be normally put up the ground. So as for the design of the antenna, it should follow the following requirements. First, vertically polarized and radiated effective field of not less than of that of a 60-degree vertical radiator for single vertical towers may be employed to serve as a common antenna for two or more stations. For directional antenna system, vertical tower radiators, antenna led in and counterpoise shall be installed and should not pose a threat. A properly designed transmission line should be used between the transmitter and the antenna. Antenna radio frequency current meters should be installed permanently and it should be easily and accurately read. For the tuning house and antenna, it should be fenced and locked. Undergrounded fence should be grounded and lighting protections should be included.
Here we have the technical standards and operating requirements for AM broadcast stations in the Philippines. Next slide. Okay, so we have the transmitting equipment. So for the transmitting equipment and facilities shall be laid out in accordance with good engineering practice, thereby providing ease of maintenance and operation and safety to personnel. So for the location and layout, there are three things to consider. So first is adequate space shall be provided in the building to facilitate access to all equipment for operation and maintenance purposes. Adequate space for staff facilities shall also be provided. Next, we have adequate ventilation, and where necessary, air conditioning shall be provided to ensure satisfactory working conditions for staff and equipment. And lastly, adequate lighting shall be provided in all equipment rooms to facilitate operation and maintenance of the equipment. So next slide. So now we have the design, construction, and safety to life. So here are the key takeaways from the manual. So the transmitter must be capable of delivering and maintaining its rated carrier power within the required limits. So the limits indicated in the manual was plus 10% whether to be at full power daytime mode or at reduced power nighttime mode. The power shall be determined by the direct methods, the square of the transmission line current measured at the input of the antenna matching network multiplied by the resistance at this same point. So next we have the transmitter must be capable of satisfactory operation at the authorized operating power with modulation of at least 90% with no more distortion than given in the previous sections. So next we have the transmitter must be capable of maintaining the operating frequency within the limits of plus minus 10 Hz of the assigned frequency. Next slide. The carrier shift or current at any percentage of modulation shall not exceed 5%. Then the carrier hum and extraneous noise level, exclusive of microphone and studio noises over the frequency band 30 to 20,000 Hz, is at least 45 decibels below the level of a sinusoidal tone of 400 Hz, producing a 90% modulation of the carrier. Next slide. The total audio frequency distortion from the microphone terminals, including microphone amplifier to antenna output, must not exceed 5% harmonics voltage measurements of arithmetical sum or RSS when modulated from 0 to 84% and not over 7.5% harmonics when modulating from 85% to 95%. Distortion shall be measured with modulating frequencies of 50, 100, 400, 1000, 5000, and 7500 Hz up to the 10th harmonic or 16,000 Hz or any intermediate frequency that readings on these frequencies indicate is desirable. The audio next we have is the audio frequency transmitting characteristics of the equipment from the microphone terminals, which includes the microphone amplifier unless microphone frequency correction is included, in which event proper allowance shall be made accordingly. To the antenna output does not depart more than 2 decibels from that at 1000 Hz between 80 and 7500 Hz. Next slide, please. The transmitter must be equipped with indicating instruments to continuously measure the DC plate current and voltage and any other indicating instruments necessary for proper operation. The transmitter shall be equipped with an adequate control system for the application and removal of power, and adequate allowances shall be provided for all component parts to avoid overheating at the maximum rated power output. Next slide. Any emission appearing on a frequency removed from the carrier shall be attenuated. It depends on the frequency. So for a frequency between 15 kilohertz and 30 kilohertz, the emission shall be attenuated at least 35 decibels below the level of the unmodulated carrier. For 30 kilohertz and up to and including 75 kilohertz inclusive shall be attenuated at least 35 decibels below the level of the unmodulated carrier. And for a frequency more than 75 kilohertz shall be attenuated for at least 43 plus minus 10 log base 10 power in watts decibels below the level of the unmodulated carrier or 80 decibels, whichever is the lesser attenuation. The transmitter shall be operated, tuned, and adjusted so that emissions outside the authorized channel do not cause harmful interference to the reception of other stations. Next slide. In general, the transmitter shall be constructed either on racks and panels or in totally enclosed frames protected as required by the Philippine Electronics Code. Means shall be provided for making all tuning adjustments of any circuit involving the application of voltages in excess of 110 volts, AC or DC from the front panel with all access doors closed. Next slide. Leader resistors or such other automatic means shall be installed across all the condenser banks to remove any charge which may remain after the high voltage circuit is opened. Plate supply and other high voltage devices, including transformers, filters, rectifiers, and motor generators, shall be provided with protective circuits so as to prevent injury to operating personnel. Next slide. Voltmeters that are subject to more than 5,000 volts are required to have a suitable protective device across the instrument terminals. Wiring between units of the transmitter shall be installed in conduits or approved fiber or metal raceways to protect it from mechanical injury. Next slide. Circuits carrying low-level radio frequency energy between units of the transmitter shall be properly wired and shielded to prevent the pickup of modulated radio frequency energy from the output circuits. Each stage preceding the modulated stage shall be properly shielded and filtered to prevent the feedback from any circuit from the following the modulated stage. Next slide. An oscilloscope or a type-approved meter indicator type modulation monitor is required for monitoring transmitter modulation. A frequency monitor or a type-approved frequency meter indicator is required for monitoring transmitter carrier frequency. Next slide. So next we have is the monitoring equipment. Next slide. So first we have the frequency monitor. For the frequency monitor, the licensee of each station should have a frequency monitor of a type approved by the authority, which shall be independent of the frequency control of the transmitter. In the event that the frequency monitor becomes defective, the station may be operated without such equipment pending its repair or replacement for a period not in excess of 60 days without further permission of the authority, provided that there is proper documentation in the operation log of the station regarding the status of the monitor, and the engineer in charge of the region in which the station is located shall be notified immediately about the defective monitor. Next slide. The frequency of the station shall be compared with an external frequency source of known accuracy at sufficiently frequent intervals to ensure that the frequency is maintained within the tolerance. If conditions beyond the control of the licensee or permittee prevent the restoration of the monitor to service within the above allowed period, informal requests may be filed with the engineer in charge of the region for the location of the station for such additional time required to fully repair the defective instrument or equipment. Next slide. So next we have the modulation monitor. The two protocols. The protocol with the frequency monitor is actually similar to the modulation monitor. So first, the licensee of each station should have an oscilloscope or modulation monitor of a type approved by the authority either at the transmitter or at the place where the transmitter is controlled. In the event that the modulation monitor becomes defective, the station may be operated without such equipment pending its repair or replacement for a period not in excess of 60 days without further permission of the authority, provided that there is proper documentation in the operation log of the station regarding the status of the monitor. The engineer in charge of the region in which the station is located shall be notified immediately about the defective monitor. Next slide. The degree of modulation of the station shall be monitored with a cathode ray oscilloscope or other means. If conditions beyond the control of the licensee or permittee prevent the restoration of the monitor to service within the above allowed period, informal request may be filed with the engineer in charge of the region for such additional time required to fully repair the defective instrument or equipment. Next slide.
So with that, here are the additional information for the AM. It's the studio equipment and allied facilities. So studio location and layout. The first is building will constrain the studio shall satisfy the provisions given in section 3.2.2 of these standards. Another is the studio shall be associated with the control room, and the third is studios and control rooms shall be constructed that they are adequately insulated from extraneous noise and vibration. Next slide. So here's the broadcast auxiliary services. Broadcast transmission auxiliary services fall under three categories. The first is the studio to transmitter link, or the STL. The second is the remote pickup broadcast station. And the third is the communications, coordination, and control link. Next, please. So the frequency allocation for studio to transmitter link. Here are the three brands. The brand A, which consists from 300 to 315 megahertz. Brand B, 734 to 752 megahertz. Brand C, 942 to 952 megahertz. So the maximum power here that is allowable for the STL shall be 15 watts. Next slide. Here are the frequency band allocation for communications, coordination, and control link. There are 5 brands here. So brand A consists of 4 to 12 megahertz. It is a non-exclusive one. Brand B is 25.67 to 26.1 megahertz. Brand C is 162.235 to 162.615 megahertz. And 166.250 and 170.150 megahertz. And Bron D is 432.5 and 433 to 437.5 to 438 megahertz. Here, the maximum power allowable for communications, coordination, and control link are Brand A, 150 watts. It is in SBS. Brand B, 160 watts in ERP. Brand C is 160 watts in ERP also. And Brand D is 200 watts. It is for a repeater. Next slide. So here are the operating requirements.
So next is the operating requirements for broadcast stations in the Philippines. So first is the hours of operation. So the minimum operating schedule. The licensee of each medium frequency broadcast station shall maintain a minimum operating schedule of 2/3 of the total hours that it is authorized to operate except the emergency when due to causes beyond the control of the license. It becomes impossible to continue operating. The station may cease operations for a period not exceeding 10 days. So, broadcast outside of the authorized regular operating schedules may be aired without prior authorization from the authority provided the program falls under an emergency category or of very important relevance to the station's existence. The information shall be entered in the program and operating logs at the time the broadcast was aired. So second is the other operating practices. The percentage of modulation shall be maintained as high as possible, consistent with good quality transmission and in no case more than 125% on positive peaks nor more than 100% on negative peaks of frequency recurrence during any selection which is transmitted at the highest level of the program under consideration. So for the next requirement is the posting of station and operation license. The station license and other instrument of station authorization shall be posted in a conspicuous place in such a maintain that all terms are visible at the place the license considers to be the principal control point of the transmitter. At all other control points listed on the station authorization, a photocopy of the station license and other instruments of station authorization shall be posted. The original copy of the operator's license shall be posted at the place where he is on duty as an operator. So next is the operator requirements. A radio operator holding a valid radio telephone first class operators license shall be in actual charge of the transmitting apparatus and shall be on duty either at the transmitter local location or remote control pane. So next is the operation under subsidiary communications authorization. Operations conducted a subsidiary communications authorization shall conform to the uses and purposes authorized by the authority in granting the SCA application. Prior permission to engage in any new or additional activity must be obtained from the authority pursuant to application, therefore. So, next.
So, for the technical standards and operating requirements for FM broadcast stations in the Philippines.
So for the technical requirements, first is the safety requirement. Uh, all all equipment using electrical power shall conform with the requirements. In case of shared ownership, only one license shall assume such responsibility. For the protection of air navigation, the antenna and supporting structure shall be painted and illuminated in accordance with ATO regulations. So next is the transmitting facilities. So any site particularly suitable for FM broadcasting in an area in the absence of other comparable sites may be shared by and may be available to as many applicants as possible. So next is the subsidiary communications authorization. Permissible uses of the SCA must fall with which one of or both of the following categories. First category is the transmission of programs which are of a broadcast nature but which are interest primarily to limited segments of the public wishing to subscribe thereto. Illustrative service include background music, storecasting, detailed weather forecasting, special time signals, and other material of a broadcast nature expressly designed and intended for business, professional, education, religious, trade, labor, agricultural, or other groups engaged in any lawful activity. So for the second is the transmission of signals which are directly related to the operation of FM broadcast stations. For example, relaying of broadcast material to other FM and standard AM broadcast stations, remote queuing and other circuits, remote control telemetering functions associated with authorized STL operation and similar uses. So next is the studio equipment and allied facilities. The studio being the recognized source of the programs, materials, and other forms of intelligence of various kind and content must be properly equipped to faithfully respond to these impressions and produce the same to the highest degree possible up to the turnover point, which is the transmitter input. So next is the emergency equipment and facilities. The regular and the optional main transmitter shall be collocated in a single place. The external effects from both regular and alternate main transmitters shall be substantially be the same as to frequency and stability. Lastly, spare component parts. In order to cut down times during scheduled on-air operations, a reasonable variety and number of spare components appropriate to the equipment installed at the site shall be kept on hand. So next. So here are the classes of FM broadcast station. We have Class A station, Class B station, Class C station, and Class D station.
So here are the tables for channels for AM broadcasting, and next is the table of channels for FM broadcasting.
So, for the technical standards and operating requirements for TV broadcast stations in the Philippines. So, the general operation requirements. So, for the general operation requirements, the time of operation, unlimited time operation, and then for the minimum regular operating schedules, it includes not less than 2 hours daily in any 3 broadcast days per week, not less than a total of 12 hours per week during the first 18 months of operation, not less than 2 hours daily in any 5 broadcast days per week, not less than a total of 16 hours, 20 hours, and 24 hours per week for each successive 6-month period. If an operating station was not able to adhere to the minimum regular operating schedules, the station may limit or discontinue to operation in a period of not more than 10 days, with further authority of NTC. Moreover, NTC should be notified of the whereabouts of the said operating station. In terms of non-commercial educational broadcasts, they are not required to operate as the same as the commercial ones, but the operating hours of the station were considered during the renewal of license. In terms of transmitter, the oral and the visual transmitter of the station should not be operated separately unless falls under the following conditions. First, it is for an actual test, and second, for emergency fields in case there is a failure in either of the transmitters. So, for the station identification, a TV broadcast station should make a station identification at the end and at the start of their time operation. It should be in oral and in visual means. The identification is not needed if it will interrupt a special announcement such as a consecutive play, speech, or just a play, then etc. For the rebroadcast, a rebroadcast is defined as the use of means for reception by radio of the program of television broadcast station, and the simultaneous or subsequent retransmission of such program by a broadcast station. A rebroadcast is allowed when a station notifies the NTC. For the maintenance log, there are two types, which is the program log and the operating log. For the program log, it should have the following: entry of the station identification, entry of description of a program to be broadcast, entry that a sponsored program is announced to be sponsored, entry showing for each program of network origin, and entry of the end and the beginning of a program. For the operating log, it should have the following: entry of the time of the station has been powered, entry of interruption to the carrier wave, entry of the following every 30 minutes, the operating constant of the last radio frequency stage, transmission line meter readings, frequency monitor readings, any other required instrument, retention logs. Logs of all operation must be kept during the For the retention log, logs of the operation must be kept during the experimental period, and then logs of television broadcast shall be retained by the licensee or permittee for a period of 2 years, and then each log shall be signed by the operator. Then logs should be kept in a orderly manner and no log should be erased. So for the transmission channels, the channels allocated for television broadcasting in the Philippines are shown in the table to be seen in the next slides. Channels 62 and 69 are not assigned in Metro Manila or Metro Cebu or in any other cities where VHF channels 2 to 13 and UHF channels 21 to 32 are allocated or assignable. Commercial broadcast entities may be allowed to operate not more than one television station in any broadcast service or local areas. So here are the tables that is referred in the first slide.
So now, here are the transmitter characteristics. First is the visual transmitter. So for monochrome transmission, only the overall attenuation characteristics of the transmitter measured in the antenna transmission line after the vestigial sideband filter. So the curve shall substantially smooth between these specified points, exclusive of the region from 0.75 to 1.25. Next is the oral transmitter. The transmitter shall operate satisfactorily with a frequency swing of either positive or negative 25 kHz, which is considered 100% modulation. It is recommended, however, that the transmitter be designed to operate satisfactorily with a frequency swing of at least positive or negative 40 kHz. Number 3 is transmitter construction. In general, the transmitter shall be mounted either on racks and panels or in totally enclosed frames protected as required by Article 810 of the Philippine Electrical Code and the Philippine Electronics Code. The next is the monitoring equipment or transmitter installation ladder. So the installation of transmitting equipment shall be made in suitable quarters, and suitable facilities shall be provided for the welfare and comfort of the operator. Next is the monitoring equipment. Frequency measurements, so the visual carrier frequency and the difference between the visual carrier frequency and the center frequency of the oral transmitter shall be measured as often as necessary to ensure that they are within the prescribed tolerance. However, in any event, the measurement shall be made at least once each calendar month with not more than 40 days expiring between successive measurements. Lastly is the emergency equipment facilities. In emergency equipment facilities, there is a alternate main transmitter. So first is the regular and the optional main transmitter shall be co-located in a single place. This must be co-located because of the optional main transmitter. And B is the external effects from both regular and alternate main transmitters shall substantially be the same as the frequency and stability. Next is auxiliary transmitter. Next slide, please. Balik muna tayo. Yeah. Next is the auxiliary transmitter. Here, an auxiliary transmitter may be provided and may be installed in the same location as the same as the regular main transmitter or in another location. Its operating power shall not be less than 10% or never greater than the authorized operating power of the main transmitter. And lastly, under the emergency equipment and facilities, a licensed operator shall be in control whenever an auxiliary transmitter is placed in operation. Next slide. So here's the protection from interference. So you can see in the table that these are the values referred to the field strength at height of 10 meters above the ground. In channel 2, channel 2 to 6 there is 48 and 7. In channel 7 to 13 there is 55, and channel 21 to 32 there is 65, and channel 62 to 69 there is 70. Next slide, please. So here is the power antenna height requirement. So we have a minimum requirements and maximum requirements. So in minimum requirements, the minimum visual effective radiated power in any horizontal direction shall be 100 watts. No minimum antenna height above average terrain is specified. However, in maximum power, the maximum effective radiated powers of television broadcast stations operating on the channels set forth below with the antenna heights not in excess of 600 meters above average terrain shall be as follows. Here's the table that is shown. Maximum visual effective radiated power in dB, decibels, above 1 kilowatt. Next slide. So for our perspective,
So for the perspective, for the group, the KBP manual enlightened us about the different standards and requirements needed to run radio and TV stations across the country. There is a lot of work and upkeep required behind the scenes just to deliver information and entertainment to our devices. Technology has developed over the years to help us receive information more clearly, despite the fact that the signals have traveled over a large distance with lots of interferences. These standards help these stations deliver quality information, especially when people need it the most. Next slide. Lastly, for the concept. Our government is currently taking steps to modernize our broadcasting systems. The DICT has released a framework for the digital terrestrial television broadcasting migration plan, which will migrate current stations from analog to digital broadcasting to contribute growth in the Philippine broadcasting and related industries. Therefore, our standards should also be modernized to include the digital transmissions. Also, if there will be a transition from analog to digital broadcasting, there should also be a way to make sure that the consumers can still access their favorite TV and radio stations. And that is it for our presentation. Thank you for listening.